Ben Shapiro is one of the sharpest debaters in town and a powerful advocate for his centre-right political viewpoint. But his focus on the follies of his political opponents is leading him to be blind to an urgent call to action on the environment. And that means he's missing a huge trick. My name's Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show for Changemakers. Firstly, let's for the record put down where I'm coming from. I'm not American, I'm a Brit, reasonably obvious from the accent, and the political divide means something slightly different here. But when I do any of those online election questionnaires to see what policies you support and therefore which way you should vote, I am always confirmed as being smack bang in the middle, which to me at least makes sense. I identify myself as a pragmatist with values, whatever that means. I support the capitalist system because it's historically proven itself to be the best, but I also see the evidence that it needs to continue to evolve or else we're all done for. I support Britain's National Health Service because I think it's shown itself to be an effective and humane system, no more flawed than any other. Now, the first statement doesn't mean I'm a raging right-winger. The second statement doesn't mean I'm a raging socialist. Really, I would say I'm interested in what works. I've been known to change my mind in the face of good arguments, and any of the ideological tribes will get annoyed with me at some point because I won't adopt their worldview wholesale. Now, I say all of this because although Ben Shapiro is very much of his tribe, his instincts follow similar patterns. We have different views on a few subjects. He's changed my mind on several, and even where I disagree, his arguments have given me a much better understanding and appreciation of the other side. I would go so far as to say I'm a fan, even though I know that half of my audience won't be able to conceptualize being a fan of someone with whom you have political disagreements. However, in common with some other important figures on the centre-right, he's missing a huge trick on climate change and the environment. We know that, however rational we like to think we are, we still tend to form our opinions in reference to our peer group. And then we use our intelligence to rationalise what we already believe. Now, I think that, although with admittedly no evidence to back this up, you're more likely to do this on those issues that are peripheral to your main concern. Climate change and the environment generally are not issues of Ben's main concern. He has very well-formed arguments of the issues he spends the most time on. However, that's much less the case when it comes to the environment and climate change. I want to address those arguments quickly in this video. Why? Because it would be better for all of us if we could regain the political consensus that used to exist on the environment in terms of what we need to respond to. We can then happily distinguish ourselves by fighting over the different programs to make change, at which point you can point out the nonsense in the other side's arguments as much as you like. It was, after all, a distinguished leader on the right, Margaret Thatcher, who first raised the alarm on this issue. Now, this recent clip gives one of Ben's most repeated lines on climate change.
I don't know which reports she's looking at that millions and millions of people will die. Again, the implication for the IPCC is that lots of people will have to move, that there will be significant climate change over the next century. I'm always bewildered by the point made by folks on the left that the water levels will rise and thus millions will die over the course of the next century. Bjorn Lomborg makes this point. Does he think that people are just going to start looking down at their feet and the water is going to be rising around their feet? You know what? I'm going to wait until this thing rises a couple more meters. I'm just going to, you look down at when it rains in your house, do you notice when it leaks into your house? I do. Would you notice if the water levels rose enough that the water was now in your house? My guess is you would. Would you stick around and wait for it to reach nose level? I highly doubt it. It's not going to be day after tomorrow. It's not a giant tsunami that swamps all of the coasts around the world. That's not how this works. And yet, without this pointless resolution that actually doesn't even achieve what it seeks to achieve. As I mentioned last week, this resolution, AOC's plan suggested originally in the plan that there would be no reliance on nuclear power, which is insane. You can't go green emissions if you don't use nuclear power. But this resolution doesn't even touch what would happen with climate change. If the United States were to get to zero emissions by 2030, it would lower the global climate by something like 0.124 degrees Celsius over the next century. That ain't going to cut it. You know who's responsible for the growing level of emissions in the world? That would be India, China, Brazil, developing countries, not the first world.
At this point, he's criticising the Democrats' recently launched Green New Deal and pointing out entirely correctly that it's a document that conjures big changes without filling in any of the details of how you'd get there without completely wrecking the economy. But criticising the failings of the other side is the easy part. The question is, do you accept what needs to be done? If so, what do you propose to do instead? From this clip, it's clear that although Ben has said before that he accepts the science that suggests climate change is taking place, he clearly doesn't believe the impact is going to be that big a deal. His line about people moving from flooded areas, I mean, it's expressed in absurd terms for effect, but the basic line is that the principal impact of climate change will be higher sea levels. Higher sea levels will cost money and inconvenience, but ultimately the human race will adapt. However, that isn't the only change, and it's arguably not even the most important. We're currently seeing species loss at a massive rate, currently estimated to be 58,000 species each year. Worldwide insect populations are significantly declining, which has knock-on effects on all the animals that use them for food. Ocean acidification, also a consequence of global warming, is one of the factors that's similarly putting the marine ecosystem under stress. Coral reefs are the first to go, many species are following. As an active Jew, I would hope Ben would have some concern for what we're doing to God's creation, but even if you want to be completely human-centered and cold about it, the collapse of natural systems affects our ability to survive and thrive. Large numbers of the crops we need for human survival depend on pollinators. These pollinators are amongst the species in rapid decline. 1 billion people depend on the oceans as a principal source of protein. Add to that the fact that our soils worldwide are being eroded at a rapid rate between climate change, deforestation and unsustainable farming methods. Land degradation will reduce crop yields by up to 50% in some areas and 10% globally by 2050. Now, you don't have to believe some of the over-dramatised headlines to understand that however productive we think we are at the moment, the signs are there that we're going to hit a wall. It takes a leap of imagination, because at the moment a lot of the key indicators of human progress are showing up pretty well. We've reduced absolute poverty worldwide, even as the population has doubled. We've reduced infant mortality, we're increasing the education of girls. As societies are coming out of poverty, birth rates are coming down to the point where we can see population growth potentially levelling off. This is why people on the left going on about how millions will die because of climate change get little traction. Because many millions more used to die because of extreme poverty, and those people are now not dying. If you really believed it was just about that, you'd trade one off against the other, and you'd say that, well, overall, fewer people are dying this way. Environmental policies that increased poverty would be worse than the alternative. But while the social progress has been good, the environmental signals are not. The scientific community is united on the headlines. Ben would be the first to argue, I'm sure, that when you get belief in scientific principles that divides along party political lines, people are following their tribal affiliation, not interpreting the science. But the owner of the catchphrase, facts don't care about your feelings, should recognise that the environment equally doesn't care about your ideology. And as I mentioned before, the multiple collapse of a number of different environmental variants is considered likely to reverse our progress to date. We should be able to look at that and respond to it before it has started to happen. The question is, what should be done? Ben's current position is purely a reaction to the other side. The other side says it's a crucial issue, he's therefore inclined to think otherwise. The other side puts forward less than brilliant policy propositions, Ben focuses on attacking those. But what's missing is any semblance of leadership. There's an opportunity to grasp this and make it the rights issue. After all, Conservatives have traditionally been about protecting what we have that's worth preserving. Conservatives have been about protecting their communities. Yes, we want solutions to the environment crisis that hold on to the economic gains we've made over the last century. Yes, we want solutions to the environmental crisis that protect people's freedoms, that don't let politicians and their advisors dictate whether we're allowed to eat meat or not. Yes, we want solutions to the environmental crisis that are pragmatic, that work with people the way they are, and not the backdoor excuse to introduce centralised planning and control. Yes, we want to put pressure and leverage on the countries that are increasing their emissions to be able to tackle the bigger aspects of the problem. But at the same time, we also want to remember that our countries were the ones that bumped up historical emissions in the first place, and we do believe in taking responsibility for our actions, don't we? And why else should we take a lead? Well, countries with entrepreneurial energy and innovation are the ones that can lead the world and indeed gain first mover advantage in the marketplace by leading the world. We've already seen this in action. In the 1980s and 90s, the American motor companies focused on lobbying against emission standards, trying to fend off the change. Japanese companies focused on innovation to meet an obvious emerging agenda. Lo and behold, suddenly a Japanese company became the #1 car manufacturer in the US. Now, Ben has often noted America is founded on the pioneer spirit. It shouldn't be the one that buries its head in the sand when circumstances change. The left has made the environment their issue, but their solutions don't appeal to a wide constituency. If we face a genuine crisis and don't take that mantle, then guess what will fill the vacuum when the impacts continue to increase and people begin to get scared? Don't think it can happen? Businesses are already having to adapt what they're doing because they're seeing the impacts of climate change in their supply chains. Businesses, in case you didn't notice, are not bastions of communism. They are pragmatic entities that deal with the world as they find it because they have to. Those businesses are already working on how you create wealth without emissions, and that's a difficult problem, but they are making progress. A coalition of concern between the political centre, major businesses and the scientific community could transform our current position of stalemate, and it would force the environmental extremists who want to ban everything and mandate what everyone's allowed to do to change their tune in response to a better solution. Ben Shapiro is deservedly a huge influencer in the political debate on the right in the US. We've seen in history that true leadership is not about taking your followers where they expect to go, but where they need to go. Ben is well positioned to take that leadership. If you agree with me on that, please share this video on Twitter, tag Ben and myself when you do so. You never know what might happen.